I am George Harvey. This is Tom Finnell and Jason Cooper. And we're going to be talking about energy. We're going to start by talking about the week's news. But before we do that, we're going to play some games. This is a computer. This is the actual kind of computer that was used for designing Vermont Yankee. Tom can play with that. This is a coin, all right? Now, I know that the people who are watching television can't see that coin very well. If I hold it up in front of my face, it's going to look like a little black blob. This coin was made sometime between 270 and 275 AD. It has a picture of a Roman emperor named Aurelian on it. And my guess is that in 1700 years, school children will remember Barack Obama no better than we remember Aurelian. And but the point of this, here, Jason.
Thank you.
The point of that is when our spent fuel in our nuclear plants is that old, it's going to be absolutely deadly, and it's going to be deadly until it's 5 times or more that age. And in fact, the best way of looking at the age of nuclear fuel and how long it's deadly that I know of, which is it's an objective approach, is to say we have to consider the nuclear fuel until it is no more dangerous than uranium ore naturally occurring. And that is 6 million years. Okay. During the
Run
week,
that one by me again. You said 6 million.
6 million years. It takes
What can we conceive of that's 6 million years old?
anthropoid apes.
All right.
Leave it to George to have an answer.
It's a good deal longer than the age of man.
Yeah.
6 million years from now, I don't think human beings will be around. Hopefully, our descendants, some other species, will be around. But whatever is left is not going to be like we are in some respects, I'm quite sure. Okay, energy for the week. Starting out, I mentioned last week the high cost of Hinkley C. 2 reactors, $26 billion. In order to get the reactors built, the UK government had to guarantee the investors that they could sell power for double the normal rate for 35 years. And at that guarantee, they were unable to get the investors to go ahead, so they brought in Chinese investors who were willing to take a bigger risk. Now what happens is, here's this organization called Urban Wind. I've seen similar things from solar organizations who say, this is great. These people have sold millions of dollars worth of product to companies that are trying to avoid having to pay for Hinkley C because they know that their utility rates are going to go up. So this may be one of the best things that's happened for renewable power in the last week, and certainly it's probably one of the worst things that's happened for nuclear, is getting this nuclear plant built. A Dutch organization, this is going back to the 8th of November, mentioned, by the way, gang, the Leipzig Insurance Forum says that a European meltdown in a worst-case scenario will cost 6 trillion euros. Angela Merkel has said that she's going to stop fracking in Germany. The media has been focusing on the fact that she said in areas where there's already a lot of wind development, we're going to stop subsidizing wind. But that's just those areas. Luminant Generation has said that they're shelving plans to build 2 more reactors at Comanche Point. The European Commission is saying that it's going to start working on a proposal for mandatory disaster insurance for nuclear power plants. That would be an interesting thing to see happen. The DOE is cutting red tape on small residential and commercial rooftop solar systems. Jason Cooper, by the way, has a rooftop solar system. He just minutes ago was up there replacing a minor part that needed to be fixed. And I like knowing the fact that I know somebody who has that, who can look at this thing and say, that is the solar system that I own. I own the solar system. Solar system is a funny term.
It is.
California is planning on going to new building codes that will require residential and commercial buildings to be zero net energy.
Which was that, California?
California. They're going to new building codes.
Zero net
Zero
energy.
net energy. These buildings have to require no more energy than they produce. And that's probably an environmental approach that has some reason to be done.
They've had that requirement for new construction in Germany for several years.
Well, the Germans are stodgy people. What can I say?
Well, it's nice to see a part of our country starting to follow suit on something that's as progressive as that.
Yes, it is. It is. There are places in Germany where they have whole towns, and in other parts of Europe where there are whole towns that are zero net. And there are countries in this world that are 100% renewable or more. Paraguay is a great example. The country is 1,000% renewable.
Very nice.
Very
and
nice.
What is their energy source?
It's almost all hydro. But there are other countries where they're going to progressively larger amounts of non-hydro. And there's a lot of headway being made.
Good.
Somebody made the observation that the $523 billion that is used to subsidize fossil fuel industries worldwide every year could be better spent on renewable power, because spending the money on fossil fuel subsidies means that we're subsidizing the problem, not the solution. I suspect that will change. China is expected to have more renewable plants by 2030 than the European Union, and the world energy supply, according to this Business Week article that came out on the 12th, will rise to 30%. Here's a good one. This surprised me. The Vermont Electric Co-op is planning on building a 5-megawatt solar system in its service territory.
Where is Vermont Electric Co-op?
It's north of here.
Right around Montpelier.
Well, we're in the southern end of the state. It has to be. But, so a Montpelier area?
No, I think that's the Washington Electric Co-op. The Vermont Electric Co-op operates in Windham County.
Not Windham County.
Yeah, down by Mount Snow.
That's Vermont Electric?
Vermont Electric Co-op. So
Okay.
the rural areas between Dover and Wardsboro, there's a small section in there.
Okay.
That's Windham County?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Ontario is increasing its the amount of money that it's paying for nuclear power by 30%. They need it. The Australian federal government is cutting $435 million from its annual renewable energy agency.
That's almost $500 million.
That's right. They're cutting it. And I've got a few comments for them. This is going to be a serious problem when they see what the result is. And it's not in terms of global warming. It's in terms of their income as a nation. Because they're going to be trying to sell fossil fuel and uranium. That's what their plan is. And I really think that we're going to see some... I think we're already seeing that nuclear power is in terrible trouble. Mm-hmm. And we're going to be seeing that fossil fuels are in terrible trouble within a year. And I would suspect within 6 months, really, we're going to be seeing the handwriting on the wall. I've said that before.
But this is based on economics, not activism
It's
or
based on
protests or
economics.
anything like that.
That's right. It's based on economics. And it's one of the reasons why this next thing that I'm going to tell you about, I think, is wrong. The International Energy Agency says that we have to be 48% renewable in our electric generation by 2035 to avoid going over 2 degrees Celsius in global warming increases. And they say they expect us to be 31%. So they're saying we're going to be way short of what we need to do by 2035. My own guess is that we're going to be far in excess of 48%. And the reason is because there's a bunch of things about the economics that they have not taken into account, I'm sure. And, you know, what is going to be happening here is that people are going to be realizing that when you're spending $538 billion on fossil fuels as a problem, you can stop. Countries are going to realize they don't have to spend that money on fossil fuels. If they start spending it on renewables instead, it's going to make a difference. The head of the World Energy Council has warned, this is today's news, that without financial support, nuclear power plants are not going to be built, and the whole market will remain stationary. Maybe what I should say is they've promised us that if we don't give money to these people, they won't build new plants.
That would be good.
All right, a remote-controlled robot has succeeded in pinpointing 2 holes in the containment vessel of the Unit 1 reactor at Fukushima Daiichi. That's interesting. And now here is the news item that I think is probably the most important of the week. EOS Energy Storage says that it is currently starting to market a battery that is a 1 megawatt battery that can deliver 6 megawatt hours of power. And this battery it's a zinc air battery. Mm-hmm. And which means that you don't need fancy, rare earth metals and things like that to make it go. You don't need lithium to make it go. It can go through 10,000 cycles. And so it's a 30-year thing. And it says in the news release it costs $160 per kilowatt hour. Now, $160 per kilowatt hour sounds like a lot, but you have to take that as $160 per kilowatt hour for something that cycles 10,000 times. So in order to know the price of the power that this thing is going to be delivering in terms of the investment that is made in it, you divide $160 by 10,000.
But that's on top of the generation. That's just the storage.
That's the storage. That's right. But on the other hand, if you add this to the cost of power generated by wind, which happens to be our cheapest power source in the United States right now, you come up with wind plus battery storage is very competitive with natural gas at current natural gas prices. Now, this brings in the next thing, and that is current natural gas prices are probably not going to go down.
You're talking natural gas?
Yeah.
Okay.
Gas prices are not going to go down. I saw a news item, I think it was last week, in which they said that the typical fracked well loses productivity at a rate of 10% per month.
From initiation?
Yeah. This
is a lot of decline.
It's a lot of decline. It means that you lose a little over 70% of your productivity in the first year. And that in turn, and of course you're going to lose another 70% in the second year. So, what is 30% of 30%? You're going to be down to 9% after 2 years. Mm-hmm. And that means that the cost of building fracked wells is not going to be recovered very well. And when that really gets, and it's already been getting into the industry. I mean, the price of leases for fracking has been going. The value of leases last year declined 50% in the course of the year. This is land lease prices for fracking. And I'm beginning to think that the fracking industry is in trouble. And oil shale is in trouble. It's going to be a different world at some point in the not very distant future, because people are going to start realizing that at $100 a barrel, there are better solutions than oil, and there are better solutions than coal, and that's where we are now.
Well, at that rapid decline, the environmental damage from doing the fracking will last far longer than the production of the wells.
The environmental damage from the fracking will probably last forever. I mean, basically what happens is you go in and you start fooling around with what's happening underground. You don't know what's down there, but you're breaking up rocks. You're injecting chemicals. You're releasing gases which go into the environment. Methane into the air. Methane into people's water taps. I mean, this is not nice. And the rocks are cracked, and they're going to stay cracked. And the problem is, even after all of the gas is released and all the oil is released and everything's worked its way up to the surface and decomposed, what you have to do next is you have to rebuild the aquifers.
What does that mean, rebuild?
Well, if you go down the roads in Vermont, and you look at you see sedimentary rocks by the sides of the roads, and in it you see marble. Mm-hmm. Okay, that marble is deposited. It was deposited many years ago between the rocks, and it sealed up cracks between the rocks, and we have to wait for that kind of thing to happen. We have to, in order to get the aquifers back, we're going to have to wait for million-year plus processes to do their work.
I was going to say, it sounds like geological time.
We're talking about geological time. Yeah, we are. The damage that we're doing, that we are doing in order to get power this year and next year, is producing results that are going to be affecting our humanity for as long as it exists, basically, is what it comes down to.
So fracking is becoming less and less desirable?
Well, fracking, yeah. I think it's becoming more and more known that fracking is undesirable, and yes, people are starting to oppose it. Germany is about to ban it. France has already banned it. Vermont has banned it, although there are people who are saying, no, that's not really a ban on fracking. That's something else. I don't know what it is, but they're saying that. That has been in the news in the last year, and the last week, rather. And I'm actually looking now at today's news. The elephant in the room. Tad Montgomery wrote a thing that appeared in the Commons, in which he is saying, how do you, he starts out by saying, how do you eat an elephant? This is an old African, he calls it a saying. I think it's more like a joke. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. How do you save us from global warming? One bite at a time. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you, I saw the state of Vermont database on grid-tied systems, renewable systems, solar systems. I think it was just solar systems. Mm-hmm. 3,600 of them.
That's great to hear.
It's nice to hear. Now, I should have done the math before today, but there are 1.3 million grid-tied systems in Germany, and which kind of tells you how much the German citizens are behind it. And also it tells you why they're behind it. These people are tying themselves to the grid so they can reduce their power costs to nothing, or possibly make money on them. And basically, one thing that you hear is that, and I've heard this from many sources, I repeat it often, there is nothing that we can do in terms of power that is more democratic than solar. Solar power gives power to the average citizen. The average individual can put up a solar system, and now, we can have, I can go to any of a number of organizations in the state of Vermont and say, I want to have my own solar system. And they might say, well, what land do you own? None. Where do you own a house? I don't. You live in an apartment? Yes. Okay, we can help you. And I get my solar panel or my share of the investment in a solar array. And guess what? There's no down payment. But my bills go down. Why haven't I done this? Why haven't you done it, Tom?
Well, I don't have an electric bill.
You don't have an electric bill.
No, it's buried in my ranch.
Oh, so you're going to be paying for it regardless.
Yeah.
So what you have to do is get your landlord to do what Jason has done. What have you done, Jason? Explain yourself.
Well, in terms of solar electric, I've done two things. I started last fall, and with the prices coming down and interest rates coming down, it seemed like it would make sense to put up a PV system. And so I put up a 10 kilowatt PV system, which is 44 panels on the roof of a building I have in town. And that system will generate approximately $225 worth of electricity every month. That becomes a credit that I can apply to any electric bill I choose. So the fact that it's on that building does not mean that it has to only be applied to that building. And so I use that to offset the electric that my office uses.
Mm-hmm.
And it has been very cost effective. It looks like that system will pay for itself in about 8 years. So that means what I'm used to be paying to the electric company, for the next 8 years I'll be paying to the bank for borrowing all of the money to put that system up. At the end of 8 years, when I've paid that off, that cost just goes away. I own the system outright. I will owe nothing on the system, and it will continue to generate at $225 every month.
This is a system that is net metered?
This is net metered, yes.
Okay. I think people should understand net metered systems. And here, you know, one of the things that I do, the first thing I do in the morning is I get up and I work on my blog for 3 hours. And I've been keeping track of the number of headlines I look at day by day. And it turns out I was right. It's about 2,000 a week. But I spend time on that, and I learn quite a lot. But then I go and I start working for this. Let's see, can I get that up there? Yes, Green Energy Times. That, by the way, is a beautiful picture. I know that it's not going to be anywhere near so beautiful on television, but it's a beautiful picture. If you ever see it on the internet, it looks prettier on the internet. It's a picture of the sun rising over Manchester, New Hampshire, and the headline next to it over here says that net metering has arrived in New Hampshire. And that's an important issue. This, again, is Green Energy Times. You pick it up all over the area for free. The net metering does what for a person who owns?
So what net metering means is that you put up a system, and there's actually two ways that net metering could work.
Okay.
One is that if you tie it in on the building that it's, if you put the solar system on the same side of the meter as the building you are consuming power on, then what will happen is the power that is generated by your system will be consumed at that house first. If your system is generating excess power, it runs the meter the other way.
Backwards.
So it will run your meter backwards. And so with a solar system, for example, at night when you're not generating, you're not collecting any solar power, your meter is running forwards the way it does typically. And then during the daytime, when you might be using less, but the sun is shining, it's running the meter the other way. So what you end up with is the net of that use and consumption at the end of the month. So in that scenario, the power company, they don't send you a check for the excess if you generate more, but you end up with a credit on your bill that could be applied to
the next
day or the next month. The other way of doing it, which is the way I do it, is I have a separate meter which just tells me how much the system has generated. And so I end up with a credit of the total generation, and then I tell Green Mountain Power what meters I have anywhere else in that system that I would like that credit applied to. And so if I'm generating $220 worth of electricity, and then I have another bill that's $100, it would cover all of that, and then I could put another meter on the list, so I could have 2 meters on the list, and they would apply everything to the first bill, and then they'd apply it to the second bill until they had used up whatever my credit was. And so that gets set up, and I can change those meters anytime. And that credit just offsets whatever my consumption was at the other locations.
And this is something that you borrowed money to do. Did you have to put a down payment on the system?
I have to put a down payment on the system. You mean to build it, or
to
just
get it built?
The financing is not actually on the system itself.
I
I have
see.
a line of credit, so
Okay.
I borrowed the money. But
Okay.
no, I went on from that project
Yes.
to, after several months of seeing what the return on that investment was,
Having had the experience.
having had the experience and having seen how well this worked, I wanted to build as big a system as I could, because it's all good news. So I began putting together a larger system, a 150 kilowatt system, which is a ground-based system. And I found an installer. I found someone who had a piece of property who was very happy to lease me a piece of it to be able to put this system up on. And I approached the bank and said, I would like to borrow the money for this. The banks don't want to go near that. The banks, I could show them the numbers. I could show them my actual track record and say, here's this system. This is exactly what it will do. They were very happy to loan me money, but not on that.
Interesting.
So I actually had to take a different building than I had, and I had to borrow money against that to be able to put into the PV system. I think that the technology of PV systems and the value of them and the cash flow of them is new enough that the banks and financial organizations don't really know how to assess their risk.
They're uncomfortable with the risk.
Correct.
Unlike the Chinese investors for Hinkley C, who put billions and billions of dollars into it in order to get something. This brings up an interesting issue, which is we don't know what the costs will be associated with nuclear power 5 years from now. We don't know what the costs will be associated with natural gas or coal or oil 5 years from now. Because we don't know what the risks will be, and we don't know what the fuel costs will be. But we do know what the fuel costs are for wind and solar. And this is something that banks are, I'm starting to see this in the news. Admirals is getting involved in this. The Vermont State Employees Credit Union is getting involved in it. And there are financial organizations that are getting more involved. And I think we're probably going to see more and more of that developing. It'll become easier.
I think so.
But one thing that I've noticed is that actually for over a year now, individuals who are looking to have their own solar system can buy into a community solar system of one kind or another. And there's a bunch of different ways this is done. And honestly, I don't understand the differences among them. But I know that there's a bunch of them, and I know what the effect is. And the effect is you can go in there, you can say, I'm going to buy in, not put any money down. I'll pay the financing. I'll own the system or own my share of it outright in 8 years or whatever the term is. And in the meantime, I'm paying less for power than I am now. So we've got these options that are coming up that make a huge difference. In the future, 20 years from now, we're going to be seeing a different system. Where 5 years from now, we're going to be seeing a different system, where the banks and the financial institutions are more willing to loan money.
Well, as they see what happens, as they see the track record, they're going to realize that it's very low risk,
Right.
that it's incredibly dependable as a source of revenue or a source of, I guess actually with net metering, it's deferred costs.
Yes.
So whatever that system generates, my costs of my business go down by that much.
Yeah.
The other problem that I had when I was trying to do this is finding insurance for a system like this was a real challenge. I talked to several insurance companies. Most of them wouldn't go near it. The few that would were talking about, well, this is a rather small system. We usually insure commercial systems, and so they wanted me to fill out these applications as if I was running Vermont Yankee. It really was ridiculous.
Which, by the way, doesn't need that kind of insurance.
Right, you don't need insurance.
If you
That's
have a
true.
nuclear power plant, you can avoid paying for insurance by having the federal government
I finally was
assume
able.
the risk.
I was finally able to track down an insurance company that is relatively new, and I love their story. They went to put a PV system on the roof of their office building. And when they did, they then tried to get an insurance company to underwrite it, and nobody would.
Now, they were an insurance company.
They were an insurance agency.
I see, okay.
And so what they did was they finally found an insurance company they would work with and created a policy specifically for these mid-sized systems. And so my insurance quote was a third of what all the rest of them were.
Interesting.
So it's nice to see that the industry is changing.
It is.
And
Who was that, by the way, just in case anybody watching wants to know?
I don't know off the top of my head.
We'll try to get it for next time.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, it's interesting to see these changes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting to see also, I told you, and I mentioned in our pilot show, which was last week, and I've seen more information on this come in. A nonprofit in Boston called Ceres, which is CERES, got 70 financial organizations to co-sign letters to 45 fossil fuel companies, basically saying, we want to know at your next stockholders meeting, we would like you to tell us what is going to be done about maintaining your business value in a marketplace that is affected by global warming. So these fossil fuel companies are having to address global warming because the financial organizations are demanding this. And these financial organizations are worth a total of $3 trillion. This is the organizations that signed this letter. And Ceres sent out a letter today. I didn't see it in the news, but I did get a copy of it, saying that the majority of those organizations have acknowledged that this is a real problem that they have to address already.
Good.
That's interesting. You know, when you come across a global warming denier, the fact that a majority of the fossil fuel companies that have been addressed by this letter have said this is a real problem, we understand that it's a real problem, we have to do something about it, basically is saying denial is not working. It's not something that, and I've known, you know, I remember being at a gathering in New Jersey several years ago, and I said something about global warming, and the people who were there said, "You believe in global warming?" And every single person present thought that this was a myth that had been invented by socialists to destroy capitalism.
Did he wince?
I don't think so. Jason, are you a capitalist?
I would have to say probably, but depends on how you define a capitalist.
Well, yeah, I suppose it does.
There are many ways to define it.
Yeah, and the original way to define it was produced by a man named Karl Marx. I think that's what the story was. I might be wrong. It might have been Engels, but one way or the other, it's a term that has become adopted by a lot of people who are using capital. Now, I don't see anything wrong in using capital, but I think that it makes a certain amount of sense to use it productively instead of just making yourself rich. You can only drive one car at a time. Now, Jason, you have other things besides solar panels.
I do.
You have a distributed power system.
I do. I have down on Elliott Street a group of 5 buildings that include a total of 20 units in them. And in our effort to control costs and to get away from fossil fuels, we ended up putting a wood pellet-fired boiler in one of the buildings and running underground hot water lines to the other 4 buildings. And we are able to reduce our oil usage annually by 10,000 gallons of oil. The nice additional benefit of that was that I cut our fuel costs from somewhere around $35,000 a year down to about $8,000 a year in wood pellets.
Now, as a capitalist, what you're suggesting here is that capitalism can benefit from the understanding that renewable energy costs less than fossil fuels.
Mm-hmm. As a capitalist, what I found is that I had much more control of my costs. For, I don't know, starting 10 or 12 years ago, I recall the first year I got a notice that the oil that I'd been paying 67 cents a gallon for was being increased to 91 cents a gallon in 1 year, and I was aghast that I was having such a huge increase. And so that began my paying attention to energy efficiencies and how can we cut our use. The following year it went from 91 up to 120 or $1.26, and I'm watching these 30 to 50% increases coming year after year. And that was wiping out all of the income from my company, is seeing that kind of astronomical jump. At the time, I was consuming somewhere in the order of 50 to 60,000 gallons a year. So to have a 50% jump or 30% jump in the cost of oil was an incredible amount of money. So I began shifting to technologies that were more stable. I've been using wood pellets at that location for 7 or 8 years now. And I don't think the price of wood pellets has fluctuated more than 10% over that entire time period. So I have a much more stable fuel supply. My energy dollars aren't going to support wars overseas and going to companies that have become some of the wealthiest companies in the history of the world. My energy dollars are going to a wood pellet plant in Jaffrey, New Hampshire, and supporting jobs in this region.
And you know, this is a really important thing that a lot of people don't realize. There are a couple of things that really I think we have to address. And one of them, you know, I'm going to show this again because, you know, this is truth in advertising. That's what I'm doing. Green Energy Times editor Nancy Ray Mallory and I had a discussion, and I went to a thing about lobbying legislators in Montpelier recently, and you know, learned a lot there. But one of the things that I think we have to do is we have to dispel a few myths, and one of those myths is that because wind and solar are intermittent, they are not reliable. And what I'm seeing is a situation where the banks, the insurance companies, are starting to get an understanding of something here that they had never really got into their minds before, and that is wind and solar are very reliable. Fossil fuels are not. Nuclear is not. And the reason is because they can look at the cost of a wind turbine and how much that wind turbine is going to be making, how much it's going to cost it keep it and so forth over a period of time. And they can have a pretty good idea of what that wind turbine is going to be paying for fuel 20 years from now, which is nothing, because it just doesn't buy fuel. And they can have the same kind of understanding of solar. And what they cannot get out of fossil fuels, which they, their proponents claim run 24/7, and it's not true. The nuclear plants, which are the ones which maintain the best record in terms of their capacity factor, the amount of time that they're actually running, only run 90% of the time in the United States and 80% of the time elsewhere, which kind of bothers me a little bit, because it means to me that maybe they're running them too hard or they're refueling them too fast. But nevertheless, they go down, just like wind, just like solar. The power comes in from elsewhere. It just does. We can do that. And with renewables, we've got a lot of different choices. We've got many, many, many different choices. We've got possibly geothermal, but we certainly have hydro. Hydro does not depend upon dams. I can name 5 different kinds of hydro that doesn't have dams. 5 different kinds. And we're just beginning to tap this stuff. We've got different kinds of solar. We've got biomass, and the biomass can come from different sources. And the biomass plants can be different kinds of plants. And they can produce less pollution than natural gas. And they can be used to fuel cars. I think I mentioned to you that there's a carbon negative way of producing butanol out of cellulose.
I don't recall that.
You mentioned it here.
I mentioned it here last week. Butanol is a fuel. It's like ethanol. It's an alcohol, but it's a bigger molecule than ethanol. And it has been shown that in at least some vehicle engines, you can just put butanol in and run the engine. It will not damage the engine the way that ethanol will if you put in too much in the gasoline. You can mix butanol with gasoline in any portion that you would mix ethanol in and get something which has got more power. And you can mix much larger amounts. An organization called ITRI in China, in Taiwan, that's China of a sort, announced that they are marketing. They're actually marketing. They've tested it. They're bringing it to market. The technology, they're licensing the technology. They're not just going to build little plants here and there. If you have a chemical plant, you can probably license this technology.
And from cellulose? So
From
what
cellulose.
Is that you're just using ground up trees? Or
You can use ground up trees, you can use switchgrass, you can use cellulose from algae, you can use, there's lots and lots, you can use peanut husks, you can use coffee beans that have been through you've got agricultural waste, you've got waste from growing sugarcane that used to be dumped in rivers and choked the rivers, and now you can use it. It's got value. You can sell this stuff that in the past had been used as trash. And you can make the butanol out of that using a process that is carbon negative. It takes more carbon out of the atmosphere than it puts in. That's what they're saying.
What is your byproduct when you are burning this? As
Carbon dioxide and water, but the carbon dioxide is carbon dioxide that had been in the atmosphere. And the process over its life cycle takes more carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere than it puts in.
So where does the excess go?
Honestly, I don't know. I haven't gone far enough into it to see that. But my suspicion is that what they're saying is when you have a tree, for example, 50% of the plant is underground. When you have grass, 50% of the plant is underground. If you're growing switchgrass and it's 6 feet tall, you've probably got 10 feet or 15 feet of root underground supporting that grass. And what happens is that when the harvest is made, or when the grass dies down at the end of the summer, because switchgrass is a perennial, the roots are underground, and roots parts of them die, but the carbon in them stays underground. So the process of getting that switchgrass is carbon negative. It actually takes more carbon out of the air than it puts in. And you can produce butanol in a way that's carbon negative. And what ITRI says about butanol in the United States is that if we replaced our ethanol, which is not carbon negative, with butanol, which is, in the amount that's currently in the fuel, we would be cutting 60 million tons of CO2 a year from our emissions, just in the United States alone. And there's no reason why we shouldn't be doing this. Now, I think what I'm saying is that, what I'm seeing is the pressure on the fossil fuel industry is coming from every side. And this is also true of nuclear. The fossil fuel industry is in a declining market. In 2010, the amount of worldwide investment in efficiency was as great as the worldwide investment in fossil fuels or renewable energy. And that efficiency is cutting the amount of power that's needed in an amount which is disproportionate. It's huge. It's a very big thing. It's the cheapest way we can cut energy costs and fossil fuel use. So the market is declining even though the population is increasing and even though the productivity is going up. The energy market is declining. But in addition to that, there's competition from renewables. And in addition to that, there's political pressure. And in addition to that, they're running out of fuel and their prices are going up. And the competition that they've got coming up against them doesn't have fuel costs. So what are they going to do?
Well, a question I have related to that is, what is it going to take to stop the federal government from subsidizing fossil fuels?
Well, the UN is starting to make noise about subsidizing fossil fuels. This was in the news that I read at the beginning of this program. We are in a position where I think the federal government is going to have to start looking hard at why it's subsidizing fossil fuels and how. Now, of course, there's a lot of information that's out there that's saying the federal government isn't subsidizing fossil fuels, or the subsidy is really very low, or whatever it is they want to say. But that's what they're doing. Now, I have to ask a question, Tom. Do you remember what time we started?
After 10:45.
After 10:45. Wow.
That was the last time I checked my
So we've
watch.
still got a few minutes to go. Okay.
I guess we do. Yeah.
Okay, good. What I'm seeing is that there's no good news for the fossil fuel industry unless you're going to say that fracking is good news. But the news on fracking does not appear to be good.
Well, one of the concerns that I have is that as I shifted away from the fossil fuels, the emissions from the fossil fuels are bad enough. But even burning wood, although it's far, far better, when I'm burning wood pellets, I'm still burning something, and there's still emissions.
There's still two things. One is smoke, and that's the particulates, and the other thing is CO2. But when you're burning wood, the overall effect is that the CO2 is drawn out of the air to grow the trees that are then cut down to burn the wood, which produces the CO2. And it's a cycle. You're not pulling it out of the ground anymore and just putting it into the atmosphere.
So burning wood is certainly better than fossil fuels.
That's right.
And one of the things that I would like to shift to is now there are emerging technologies for providing heat and hot water, which is the fuel pump technology, which has been around for a long time.
Long time.
And for people who don't know what a fuel pump is, or a heat pump, sorry, a heat pump is basically a refrigerator. What a refrigerator compressor does is it takes heat out of one place and puts it in another. So to take that and turn it around, you can put the hot side of that inside a building to provide heat, and you put the cold side outside, and they've become efficient enough that you can actually, when it's as low as 15 degrees below zero outside, still get enough heat energy out of the air to be able to heat a space, if the space is efficient enough. So I've just put in the first one of these that I can.
You're doing more and more of this.
Well, it looks like it's going to make a lot of sense,
Yeah.
and I want to be able to try this out to see how well it functions, and if it is cost effective, then this coupled with the photovoltaic system I put in generating electricity, since the heat pump is electric, that gives me a totally renewable, no combustion heat and hot water system for my buildings.
Now, this brings up another thing, too. The whole question of net zero for a building, where the building is not using any more power than it's producing. And it happens that you can do that with a building that's already been built. You can take the old Vermont farmhouse, and if you know how to do it, and you're willing to spend a little money, you can turn that into a net zero building so that it is in fact producing as much as it uses. Now, my grandmother used to live in a farmhouse in New Hampshire, and I just want to point out for the record, when that farmhouse was built, the farm was net zero, because they were cutting their own wood for their own stoves, and they were deriving their income from apples and cattle.
So the building that we just did this with
Yeah.
is a building that's a couple blocks off of downtown. It's an older 3-bedroom house. This was not built in any particular efficient way.
Yeah.
And so we are retrofitting. This is called a deep energy retrofit. And we have taken this house that is probably just about 100 years old. We have very thoroughly insulated it and air sealed it. We've replaced things like windows to make them more efficient. And then we have installed this heat pump system. And I'm looking forward to seeing how effective it is. That is supposedly going to be a much more efficient heat system, even if we were tied into the grid.
Well, do you know what the efficiency is?
The efficiency is supposed to be 40. It's supposed to be consume 40% of the electric of if you used regular electric heat.
Which means that it's 250% efficient, because
Correct.
regular electric heat is 100% efficient, because all of the energy that goes into it is used for heat.
Correct.
So this is, people are going to have to get accustomed to the fact that there are words out there that are being used, and they're correct, but they're not being used quite the way you'd think they're being used. Heat pumps are extremely efficient, and it would be interesting to me to see the comparison between a biofuel plant making electricity, driving heat pumps, and having and the use of the same amount of fuel in a home in a traditional wood stove. And my suspicion is that you could heat the house and give it power out of the same amount of wood.
Could well be.
Gentlemen, I think we're
Drawing to the
I think we are coming very close to the beginning of the end.
And my blog, for those people who want to see it, is geoharvey.wordpress.com. And if you just look up Geo Harvey, you'll probably find it if you do a Google search. But we will be reminding you of that on a weekly basis, I hope. So I will look forward to seeing all of you in that camera next time.